So if there are any general questions that you would like to ask the panel across the range of test and demonstration issues that we've discussed here today, would you like to put your hand up and ask away? And if you don't, I will ask on your behalf. Okay, I shall ask on your behalf then. They're not prepared for this because I asked them what they'd like to be asked. I said, you choose, so I've chosen. So I think what I'd be interested to know is what can we learn from other sectors? One of those slides showed an Airbus A380 alongside it, and you think about what happens in an aircraft. They don't put the aircraft up with an engine that hasn't been fully tested. We do put untested things in the water. So what do the panel think about the way that other industries test and validate their machinery before they actually use it in anger? Anyone like to comment on that? You'll need to press your button if you'd like to answer. Yeah, fire away, Terry.
Get in there first, I think. Yeah. I think one of the areas I'd like to mention in terms of other sectors is I think certainly offshore and onshore wind in terms of test and validation, there's probably more collaboration. That is a competitive industry, granted, but one of the key issues we're wrestling with just now is what we can do to support some information sharing and learning and sharing experiences from test and validation. I think that's particularly true when you're going offshore. You're looking at new turbines, you're looking at performance, and you're looking at issues. I think you can look at other industries, how they've developed, how they've matured, and how there's an increase in collaborative efforts. It's in everybody's interest to reduce the cost of energy. I think a big part of that is going to be feeding back from early operational performance issues and test and demonstration back into the design cycle. And I don't think we're really going to get that until there's more collaborative efforts there to share some of the learning and experience in that area.
Ian.
I think my candidate would be what we can learn from the oil and gas sector. You would expect me to say that perhaps coming from Aberdeen. But as you can see from our project, I was saying that cost reduction has to involve all phases from design, construction, commissioning, operation and maintenance. The project engineer on our project is Technip, a major company from the oil and gas supply chain. And so any learnings we can bring across from working in the marine environment with similar project management, engineering challenges, etc., would be well received and go from the demonstration site into the major fields offshore.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to contribute to the question, or?
John, go ahead. Great. I think I just like to echo Ian's comment. I think there are huge lessons to be learned from oil and gas. This is not an unprecedented scale. For me, looking at the industry from my old sort of financial hat, I think one of the big areas which is still to be fleshed out is putting together a consortium and how you really share risk and cost in some sort of a constructive way. I think in some ways the turbines are, there's still a long way to go, but they're reasonably advanced. But there's a whole balance of plant, all from the foundations all the way to the cabling and the installation, and I think for the power generation companies, what they need is a way of accessing consortiums, putting them together, and something that makes sense for them. My sense is they don't just want to be buying a turbine, but they want to know how the whole thing is going to get the power ashore. So I think oil and gas is probably a long way ahead in that regard. And then again, on the sort of collaborative front, I think sometimes by default, different test centres may be seen as competition, but if this is going to work, we're going to need as many offshore demonstration centres as possible and as many testing facilities as possible. So again, I think it's about collaboration rather than competition.
Right, that's me. I think wind is maybe a little bit different than some of the other renewables in the sense that now the companies that are doing offshore wind, it's so intensively capital intensive as an exercise. It's only very large companies that are really getting involved. But I come from initially the background of trying to establish marine renewables at the beginning of my work with the university. And from that experience, I would say that there's this terrible danger that you get these relatively small organizations who are trying to prove to their funders that they're further ahead than they are technically and trying to erase certain steps in the process towards having reliable devices from the funders' minds, because they represent a very big expense and a delay. And the danger in doing that is that you don't take these, you don't make these small incremental improvements that are required to actually make a reliable device by the time it's actually released. And then you have very public and damaging failures. And I sat through a very uncomfortable moment with Alan Thompson, who I met this morning here at this conference, at this exhibition. And some of you may remember his original wave power device, and they launched it, and I think about 24 hours later, it was sort of disintegrated by waves because it wasn't installed correctly. And no doubt some of that was due to the fact that maybe there wasn't the funding to do that in a stepwise fashion, and so there was a very public destruction of that device, which didn't do wave energy much good, I think, as a general industry. So that's it.
Thank you. I'm going to offer it to the floor one more time. There's a question there on the left, please. There is a mic coming down to you. Name and organisation, please, before you ask your question. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Nick Hughes from Imperial College. I was really interested to hear that it's possible to test offshore turbines in an onshore kind of test situation. And given that, I mean, it's not my area, but I'm assuming that the conditions are quite different between offshore and onshore, and I'd be quite interested to hear how that's possible and what you have to kind of account for in order to get some meaningful test results. And I suppose also how far you can go with that. Can you test an offshore turbine kind of almost all the way before kind of properly rolling it out offshore? Can you do all of that onshore, or is it only for a sort of first stage kind of testing?
Thank you. John, do you want to have a go at that? Thank you.
I think that's a very pertinent question. The first and open answer is that testing onshore in a controlled testing environment isn't quite the same as testing offshore. And one of the sciences, I think, which is going to grow rapidly on the back of these facilities is really understanding the value and what these tests mean. So in some senses, it's a very advanced way of doing things, but it's also it's the best we've got in an imperfect world. So how good that is has yet to be determined. But I think if you look at the R&D and commercialization cycle of aviation, of the automobile industry, this approach is not without precedence and is accepted not as a substitute for in-field deployment, but as a complement to it. So I think as long as you don't think it's the holy grail, but you see it as part of a wider cycle in bringing products to market, then I think that's where its value lies.
Sorry?
I would guess that you can test certain things near shore, certain things in a lab, and certain things offshore. It just depends to what extent you can actually put the nose to the grindstone of the particular component you're trying to test. And I think there are so many things that need testing before something is really, truly reliable in the offshore environment. Don't forget, it's actually very difficult to recover from a fact of, or from forgetting your screwdriver or whatever once you're in the nacelle offshore. It's a very expensive place to learn all these lessons. So I think in order to keep the cost of learning to a minimum, you really need to try and learn as much as you can at each step whilst the cost of learning is low, and reserve those things that you can only learn at an expensive offshore site for that particular step.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well, but one of the things in addition to that is we've been involved, as I highlighted, developing the Hunterston site. And onshore testing for offshore turbines is required from a certification point of view, so IEC certification standards. And we, well, a team of us have been looking at identifying such sites that meet those requirements. So, you know, they're in very short supply, having sites that are close by the sea, that meet the wind, speed, conditions and can test quickly. So take all those points on board that you need to test subsystems, get the reliability right, but ultimately what's driving the onshore testing for offshore turbines is certification. They then need to be bankable, so they need to go offshore, you know, in enough units that the financial people can be assured that there's enough operational hours on them to then finance them. So it's I suppose a multifaceted answer, but certainly the ones that I put forward for Hunters, and that's driven by people needing sites to certify the turbine.
Anyone else want to? We've got 5 minutes left. One final call to the audience for a question. If not, I'm going to be cheeky. Oh yes, no, there's one on the right-hand side there, a lady on the right-hand side. I don't need to be cheeky.
Hi, my name's Yvonne Norton. I work for Offshore. There's been talking about testing turbines, but I just wondered if there's any facilities to test offshore cables, whether it would be necessary or helpful, and if that's something that might be happening in the future.
This is an area that's been discussed on our project. We're, as I said, looking at all aspects of an offshore wind installation to see whether there's any way we could accommodate innovative aspects. We would welcome approaches from the supply chain on that subject. We've had various discussions on aspects of electrical cables that we could test on our project, although I'm sure you'll understand why we begin with the turbines in terms of supply chain and then move on to the foundations and other things will follow on. So having got our consent, you know, the supply chain work will continue. It will initially concentrate on the turbines, but it will move on to other aspects. So I'll repeat what I've said on a number of occasions publicly is if you have an idea out there in the supply chain that could be tested on a site, come forwards and provide it to us. All we can do is give it consideration and see if it can work.
Just following on for me, and yes, the offshore demonstration project in Norwich is also about demonstration of balance of plant, so not only the turbines themselves, but also at Norwich we have an electrical testing laboratory which has historically been built around the onshore grid business, but clearly that's undergoing a marinisation at the moment. And because it's located next to the marine test site, there's obviously considerable potential with the high voltage electrical testing equipment we already undertake type testing for cabling, but we're already doing quite a lot of consultancy and testing work on offshore cables as well. So I think that's a big area of focus for us, and I know it's very much on the renewable energy catapult's mind, and that there are several projects hopefully in the offing in that area. And again, we're there to sort of serve stakeholders in the industry, so very keen to engage with people if they've got ideas.
Yeah, just to confirm about what John's saying there as well. The offshore renewable energy catapult is a big area of focus for them, is cables and cable monitoring, how these cables are performing in the sea. And I think, and it's a good example of a project where we're currently working with NAREC to understand what's already here and active in Scotland. So there's some work going on at Heriot Watt High Voltage Lab, which we've hooked NAREC into, and there's a real complementarity about those facilities. But they then move from lab-based to prototype development and testing, and how you start to stress cables, maybe replicate movement offshore. And certainly I know that John's colleagues, Alex Newman's got some ideas about how they could perhaps use some of the blade infrastructure to do that testing. You're then maybe on to the dry dock facilities where you can simulate it in the sea, and then on to the likes of the offshore demonstrator. So I think there's it's probably a more complicated question in terms of what specific testing you're looking for, but I think it's a good example of an area where we're all kind of working together to provide that infrastructure pathway to take those technologies to market and ultimately demonstrate them offshore.
One little point to add is that we're looking at potentially providing grid emulation and grid fault ride-through testing capability in the drivetrain test rigs. That's not a confirmed thing, but these are ultimately mechanical to electrical converters, and the interaction with the grid is incredibly important in the cables between them. If you have a 10 megawatt onshore wind farm shutting down because there's an issue on the grid, it can probably be dealt with from a grid balancing point of view, but if you've got 9 gigawatts of offshore wind cutting out because of a grid irregularity, that's clearly going to have a huge stress on the grid. So, there are, our minds are already looking at some of the longer term implications of having much bigger turbines en masse at sea.
Thank you. It's 5:30, so I'd like to draw this session to a close. My final remarks are really around the importance of test and demonstration. I, for one, cannot see how the UK can maintain a world-leading edge in this sector without a vibrant and thriving test and demonstration research and development pathway for this industry. We need to deliver innovation through a clear pathway to that commercialisation, and I think it's a key success factor for the UK. I'd like to thank all of the speakers this afternoon. I think they've taken us through quite a nice little journey. I didn't organise the speakers or their content, but I think you can see that actually that pathway is there. We've got a lot to do, but I'd like to congratulate each one of them on the progress each one of them has made. I'd like to show your appreciation for the time they've given this afternoon. Thank you.